whoever you are, a solipsistic shibboleth, or abstemious avatar. Hello. Look around you. Go on, have a look around. What is the most obvious thing that nobody ever notices? Exactly. We are all living in a simulation. What's more, I'm only half joking about this. It's perfectly possible, maybe even probable, that everything we're doing is taking place deep within some gigantic virtual world. How can we tell if this is true? How might we test this hypothesis? Well, we can't. There is absolutely no physical tests that we could run to prove or disprove the world is a simulation idea. If we're living in the Matrix, then the results of our tests are also part of the Matrix. Whoever's running the show controls everything. So with empiricism out of the window, do we have any other good reasons to think that a simulated reality is more likely than a real reality? Well, yes. As it happens, the probabilities involved are highly suggestive. But if you don't care to hear my opinion on this topic, I wouldn't blame you. I am just an NPC after all. It just so happens that the best way to decide if we're living in the Matrix doesn't require taking any coloured pills. All we need to do is answer yes to the following 3 questions. So, think carefully, the authenticity of your entire existence is at stake. Question number 1. Is human technology likely to continue improving in the future? Now, long-term listeners of the podcast may remember from last episode, we asked a question practically identical to this one. And after some deliberation, we concluded that unless humanity meets with a catastrophe on an apocalyptic scale, computing, electronics, and fully immersive technologies are destined to grow ever more advanced. Existential threats are about the only things capable of preventing people from developing hyper-realistic virtual worlds at some point in the future. The alternative, nuclear war, alien invasion, asteroid strike, global pandemic, etc., are all worse. So your options for this question are basically yes or annihilation. Question 2. Will humans want to create virtual worlds in the future? Well, we certainly do today. Right now, all over the world, millions of people eagerly escape their humdrum reality using video games and other digital media. Lifelike simulations are also commonly used to train pilots, surgeons, and autonomous robots. The more realistic these experiences become as a training tool, the more useful they are. And the more realistic these experiences become as a recreation, the more they grow in popularity year after year. It would take some unforeseeably dramatic shift in our ethical thinking and international priorities to end the appeal of virtual tourism. So far, so yes. Question 3. Will humans be able to run multiple simulations at the same time? Right now, at the time of recording this, at about 4:30 in the afternoon on the 4th of December 2024, there are 10 people in space. Simultaneously, a far greater number are off-world exploring some freely chosen alternative to their obligatory human lives. In the last 30 days, the number of people playing the space exploration game No Man's Sky hovers around 10,000 at any given time. And this is just one title. There are a lot of other games out there. Sci-fi games, fantasy games, mystery games, horror games, you get my point. I would say it's almost certain that people will continue to design optional virtual realms for themselves in the future. And once we have the technology to sustain multiple simulations at the same time, multiple simulators increase the options exponentially. Consumers can just dip in and out of whichever life they choose, in the same way that they can have several books on the go today, or skip between movies at a click of a button. In fact, the number of simultaneous virtual worlds that could potentially exist in the future is truly beyond sensible calculation. If you, like me, answered yes to those 3 questions, it is statistically inescapable that we are living in an artificial, computer-generated world right now. All of us. In fact, it doesn't even matter if you said no to any of my previous questions, because I said yes, and my 3 yeses landed you in the Matrix too. Sorry about that. If a bazillion parallel simulations can exist, the chances that we are living in the one true world are just 1 in a bazillion. Technology far better than today's would have created worlds indistinguishable from our own. No experiment could show this to be false. The whole idea is inherently untestable, but mathematically sound. Right, so this is plausible, but if you still find the thought of us all living in a simulation somewhat unsatisfying, I have to agree with you. I file this speculative notion with other unfalsifiable hypotheses, like the existence of multiple universes, intelligent extraterrestrial life forms, and the existence of a supernatural consciousness responsible for all creation. Except, the simulation hypothesis manages to merge all 3 of those other examples together. Let me unpack this for us. Whether human consciousness evolved slowly over time, as I'll be addressing next episode, or appeared suddenly, fully formed 2 minutes ago, doesn't affect the odds of our world and our consciousness being simulated. Why the sudden jump from artificial reality to consciousness? Good question, I'm glad you asked. The answer is work colleagues. Specifically my work colleagues. A little while ago, me and some workmates were discussing how we might customize our own hypothetical simulated world, a la Black Mirror. This wasn't even a slow day, we were pretty busy. A question came up regarding the morality of populating such virtual playgrounds with multitudes of other genuinely conscious beings. The question was quite jarring, mostly because the experience of other sentient players hadn't crossed my mind. My perfect world, however else I pictured it, was built on the natural assumption that its residents be conscious and oblivious to the simulation that they were living in. If they were not autonomous, sentient, self-aware creatures, then that would sort of diminish the fun of the game, for me, the unsung architect of everything. The weight of this oversight hit me hard and left me feeling morally dirty. Which is a good thing. My guilt told me that I was a nice person after all, which cheered me up. Introspection can be a wild ride. Anywho, keep this moral question in mind as I get us back on track to multiple universes, aliens, and gods. Proving or disproving that we exist in a simulation is as impossible as proving or disproving that our universe had a creator. Even if now, staring out of the window, the clouds were to part in front of me, with flocks of angels descending on sunbeams to the sound of God's own ineffable voice, addressing me by name and proclaiming the truth of His divine existence, it would still be far more likely that I were having a hallucination, going mad, or living in a simulation. But if the world has in fact been willed into existence supernaturally by a god or gods, we might wonder why. Is there some purpose to my existence? Exactly the same question would apply if our world were digitally constructed and maintained by an advanced alien race. In both cases, the deliberate choice to bring reality about would presumably have some goal underlying it. From the inside looking out, we could only hope to guess what that external agenda might be. Still, there are a few sensible philosophical questions we might ask. Say we knew for certain that the world was a simulation. Doesn't matter how we know that. Why might someone, anyone on the outside, want to create a realistic interpretation of a natural world full of oblivious inhabitants? One suggestion is that a simulated universe could function as a sandbox for trialing new ideas. This rebranding of virtual reality isn't for recreation, it can be instructive, useful. Imagine creating Earth's twin inside your computer, accurate to the finest atomic detail, full of billions of conscious simulated humans. We could use this safe space to trial new and potentially disastrous technologies, like seafloor mining, vaccination programs, fusion power stations, military weapons, or commercial spaceships. We could run them all in the simulation first, just to see how disastrous their introduction may or may not be, and what effect it would have on the course of history. The same could be done for new economic systems, government policies, and even terrorist threats. Pilot studies rely on representative environments, so it's key that the global population remains unaware of their fabricated world. For each of these hypothetical innovations, repeated trials could be set in motion and allowed to play out and evolve naturally through time. This is basically how weather reports are generated today. All weather forecasts are just the average outcomes of numerous simulations. For any advanced civilization, human or otherwise, it might even be an essential legal requirement to get all of these ideas virtually field tested before they're rolled out into the real world. And here we are, existing, being tested on, not knowing what the test is. Other proposed solutions to the why go to all the trouble question involve answering even loftier questions. The programmers of artificial universes may want to experiment with the laws of physics, tinkering with cosmic variables here, manipulating universal parameters there. They could investigate ideas about their own universe by recreating events in silicon and twiddling the knobs. You don't need me to tell you that no space missions get off the ground without running fancy simulations first. Why not churn out a few new universes from big bangs, just to see how different things might emerge? This is all useful data that you should be proud to be a part of. Alright, so maybe we're living in a galactic crash test to see what would happen if carrots were turned orange instead of their usual colour. Great, so what should we do? How should we go about our lives? The question carries subtle religious overtones. It sneaks in the assumption that if we're all living in a temporary world created for some higher purpose, there must be a specific way that we ought to behave to bring about some particular desirable outcome. In this view, the future IT nerd responsible for encoding consciousness and God are the same person. They are functionally indistinguishable. With either God or geek behind the wheel, it feels to me that suggesting billions of years of cosmic evolution was instigated specifically with you in mind, for any reason, is a tad egotistical. Whatever a human or non-human governor of the universe might be playing at, our role in the grand scheme of things is probably just to exist. The reason the meaning of life is so ambiguous and shrouded in mystery, the reason no two groups can agree on what to do or how to behave, is part of the test. All of our actions and inactions are equally valuable data points. Would it matter to you, if the world was just a simulation, would that knowledge change anything about the way you went about your business? No, of course it wouldn't. You'd still have to get up, feed yourself, go to work, muddle along with all the other virtual humans, act on programmed emotions and instincts to better your situation in the world as you perceive it. Have another carrot, it's all good data. But the thought experiment we're discussing here has far-reaching implications. By considering how we might design an artificial universe of our own, we scooch a little closer to the mind and motivations of a god. What must he have been thinking before setting things in motion? Our insights are limited, obviously, by our inescapable humanness. The various worlds we can conceive of are restricted by our own motivations, flawed thinking, lack of imagination, and biological imperatives. Put another way, the exercise only works if God has a familiar range of emotions, values, and incentives, as we do. Luckily, most gods that have ever been postulated have revealed themselves to be remarkably human in all of these qualities. So let's return to the moral question. Is it morally defensible to create a simulated world full of genuinely conscious agents? There can only be two possible answers. Either it is, or it isn't. Objective or not. Utilitarian or not. If you believe that a legitimate moral concern should be to keep the possibility of pain and suffering and misery to an absolute universal minimum, then creating additional sentient minds must be wrong. The deliberate decision to create more consciousness, more subjectivity, and more feelings to be felt comes with the unavoidable risk of increasing the total suffering in the universe. Of course, the opposite could also be true. Things might actually turn out for the best. But then you would be justifying the decision after the event, making an argument from consequences. One of the logical fallacies we covered in episode 12. How could we ever support gambling with lives in advance? From the moment the program began, if increased misery were even a flicker of a possibility, simulating billions of individual consciousnesses would have been deeply immoral. The simulation should never have been started. For exactly the same reason, if our existence turns out to be a gift from God, then every human life is a reckless bet on the part of the Creator. The only way to avoid this awkward conclusion is to just assert that God knows everything that's going to happen in advance. In which case, why run the experiment? Why bother with existence if the outcome is already predetermined? For our lives to have any meaning, the future must be unforeseeable, which means that happiness and misery are both distinct possibilities. Which means that the deliberate creation of untold billions of lives, human and non-human, all struggling to survive and prosper, just so that a third party can observe the results, was and is a moral outrage. I'm still wrestling with this one, but for the life of me, I can't conceive of any conditions where creating a universe of conscious creatures constitutes a morally defensible project. I have my work colleagues to thank for opening my eyes on this one. Maybe the universe and all of its sentient life is justifiable. To say that I can't think of what that justification is, and therefore there isn't one, would be making an argument from personal incredulity. Another logical fallacy. If our world was intentionally created by someone or something, there's an argument that all subsequent lives would never have existed were it not for that decision. Is this not a good thing? A desirable thing? For that to be so, you would have to believe that all life, or at least all sentient life, was intrinsically valuable. a position which itself would need defending. And even then, experimenting on conscious things, intrinsically valuable or not, simulated or not, is highly morally dubious. And be under no illusions, if we have any reservations when deciding whether to include consciousness in our future digital world, these concerns would also have occurred to any divine creator who began this one. If it is fundamentally unethical to create worlds complete with mortal sentience, a creator need not be sadistic, selfish, or cruel to undertake such a creative project. A designer need not actively delight in our strife, but they must at least be apathetic to our situation to allow the universe to keep rolling. But look, it's almost Christmas. Surely we can be more charitable than that. If God knew that creating conscious beings was guaranteed to be a net positive thing to do, and that all life is intrinsically valuable, why would you settle for just one universe? If any abstraction like happiness, love, kindness, or consciousness is a legitimate good in itself, the more opportunities we can create, the better. If we sidestep the philosophical justification and just declare that creating life is a moral enterprise, creating additional worlds and additional universes full of living things becomes a moral imperative if you have the power to do so. In fact, not creating more universes would be immoral, given those presuppositions and infinite power. If by some astonishing quirk of fate, the positive experience of existing perfectly cancels out the negative, if the good in our world perfectly neutralizes the bad without deficit or surplus, then the entire enterprise of creating artificial realities is moot from a moral standpoint. Under these conditions, creating universes, life, sentience, and conscious thought might be worth a punt, just for something to do, or maybe just to better inform some separate reality, but there can be no moral justification behind it. Every way we consider the motivation for building a new universe, both God and futuristic programmers come out looking like jerks. I'd wager that our purpose in this world is simply to be, either because life and consciousness are themselves an emergent moral good, or because our simulation requires the chaotic interactions of oblivious conscious minds. Paradoxically, if the latter is true, I sincerely hope it does not become widely known. You see, if enough people embrace the artificiality of the world we're living in, and subsequently change their behaviour, the entire simulation could be invalidated. Our continued existence would hinge on our continued ignorance. I may have contributed to humanity's demise by recording this podcast, so we'd best not even think too much more about it, or someone on the outside might decide to pull the plug. Yes, well, having concrete answers is no fun. Now that we're sitting nice and comfortably on the fence, let's dive deeper into the origins of consciousness. With any luck, by jumping ship and boarding a totally different train of thought with no idea where it might land, I may eventually learn to stick to one metaphor.